In the Time of the Butterflies by Julia Garcia, Part 3, Chapter 9, Dedé, 1994 and 1960. When Dedé next notices the garden stillness is deepening, blooming dark flowers, their scent stronger for the lack of color and light, the interview woman is a shadowy face slowly losing its features. And the shades of night begin to fall, the traveler hurries home, and the campesino bids his fields farewell, Dedé recites. The woman gets up hurriedly from her chair as if she has just been shown the way out. I didn't realize it was this late. No, I wasn't throwing you an indirecta, Dedé laughs, motioning the woman to sit back down. We have a few more minutes. The interviewer perches at the edge of her chair as if she knows the true interview is over. That poem always goes through my head this time of day, Dedé explains. Minerva used to recite it a lot those last few months, when she and Mate and Patria were living over at Mama's. The husbands were in prison, she adds, for the woman's face registers surprise at this change of address, all except Jaimito. How lucky, her guest notes. It wasn't luck, Dedé says right out. It was because he didn't get directly involved. And you? Dedé shakes her head. Back in those days, we women followed our husbands. Such a silly excuse. After all, look at Minerva. Let's put it this way, Dedé adds. I followed my husband. I didn't get involved. I can understand that, the interview woman says quickly, as if protecting Dedé from her own doubts. It's still true in the States. I mean, most women I know, their husband gets a job in Texas, say, well, Texas it's going to be. I've never been to Tejas, Dedé says absently. As if to redeem herself, she adds, I didn't get involved until later. When was that? The woman asks. Dedé admits it out loud, when it was already too late. The woman puts away her pad and pen. She digs around in her purse for her keys, and then she remembers. She stuck them in the ashtray of the car so she could find them easily. She's always losing things. She says it like a boast. She gives several recent examples of her in her confused Spanish. Dedé worries this woman will never find her way back to the main road in the dark. Such a thin woman with fly-about hair in her face. Whatever happened to hairspray? Her niece Minou's hair is the same way. All this fussing about the something layer in outer space, and meanwhile, they walk around looking like something from outer space. Why don't I lead you out to the Anaquita turn, she offers the interview woman. You drive? They are always so surprised, and not just the American women who think of this as an underdeveloped country where Dedé should still be riding around in a carriage with a mantilla over her hair, but her own nieces and nephews who, and even her sons, tease her about her little Subaru. Their Mama Dedé, a modern woman. Ippa! But in so many other things, I have not changed, Dedé thinks. Last year, during her prize trip to Spain, the smart-looking Canadian man approached her, and though it had been 10 years already since the divorce, Dedé just couldn't give herself that little fling. I'll make it fine, the woman claims, looking up at the sky. Wow, the light is almost gone. Night is fallen. Out on the road, they hear the sound of a car hurrying home. The interview woman bids Dedé farewell, and together they walk through the darkened garden to the side of the house where the rented Datsun is parked. A car nears and turns into the drive, its headlights beaming into their eyes. Dedé and the woman stand paralyzed like animals caught in the beams of an oncoming car. Who could this be? Dedé wonders aloud. Your next compromiso, no? The interview woman says. Dedé is reminded of her lie. Yes, of course, she says as she peers into the dark. Buenas, she calls out. It's me, Mama Dedé, Minou calls back. The car door slams. Dedé jumps. Footsteps hurry towards them. What on earth are you doing here? I've told you 1,000 times, Dedé scolds her niece. She doesn't care anymore if she is betraying her lie. Minou knows, all of her nieces know, that Dedé can't bear for them to be on the road after dark. If their mothers had only waited until the next morning to drive back over the deserted mountain road, they might still be alive to scold their own daughters about the dangers of driving at night. Ya, Mama Dedé. Minou bends down to kiss her aunt. Having taken after both her mother and father, she is a head taller than Dedé. It just so happens I was off the road an hour ago. There is a pause, and Dedé already guesses what Minou is hesitating to say, for therein waits another scold. I was over at Fella's. Any messages from the girls? Dedé says smartly. Beside her, she can feel the eager presence of the interview woman. Can't we sit down first? Minou says. But there is some emotion in her voice Dedé can't quite make out. She has soured her niece's welcome, scolding her the minute she gets out of her car. Come, come. You're right. Forgive your old aunt's bad manners. Let's go have a limonada. I was just on my way out, the interview woman reminds Dedé. To Minou, she adds, I hope to see you again. We haven't even met, Minou smiles. Dedé apologizes for her oversight and introduces the woman to her niece. Oh dear, what a mishmash of gratitude follows. The interview woman is delirious at the good fortune of meeting both sister and daughter of the heroine of the 14th of June Underground. Dedé cringes. She had better cut this off. Unlike their aunt, the children won't put up with this kind of overdone gush. But Minou is chuckling away. Come see us again, she offers, and Dedé, forced to rise to this politeness, adds, Yes, now you know the way. I want to see fella, Minou begins after she is settled with the fresh lemonade. Dedé hears her niece swallow some emotion. What could be wrong? Dedé wonders. Gently now, she prods Minou. Tell me what the girls had to say today. That's just it, Minou says, her voice still uneven. They wouldn't come. Fella says they must finally be at rest. It was strange hearing that. I felt sad instead of glad. Her last tie, however tenuous, to her mother. So that's what the emotion is all about, Dedé thinks. Then it strikes her. She knows exactly why Fella was getting a blackout this afternoon. Don't you worry. Dedé pats her niece's hand. They're still around. Minou scowls at her aunt. Are you making fun again? Dedé shakes her head. I swear they've been here all afternoon. Minou is watching her aunt for any sign of irony. Finally she says, All right. Can I ask you anything, just like I do, Fella? Dedé laughs uneasily. Go on. Minou hesitates, and then she says it right out, what Dedé suspects everyone has always wanted to ask her, which some politeness kept them from. Trust Minerva's incarnation to confront Dedé with the question she herself has avoided. I've always wondered, you all were so close. Why didn't you go along with them? Certainly she remembers everything about that sunny afternoon a few days into the new year when Patria, Mate, and Minerva came over to see her. She had been preparing a new bed in the garden, enjoying the rare quiet of an empty house. The girl had the day off, and as usual on a Sunday afternoon, Jaimito had gone to the big galera in San Francisco, this time taking all 3 boys. Dedé wasn't expecting them back till late. From Mama's house on the main road, her sisters must have seen Jaimito's pickup drive away without her and hurried to come over and pay Dedé this surprise visit. When she heard a car stop in the front of the house, Dedé considered taking off into the cacao grove. She was getting so solitary. A few nights ago, Jaimito had complained that his mother had noticed that Dedé wasn't her old lively self. She rarely dropped by Doña Leila's any more with a new satin strain of hibiscus she'd sprouted or a batch of pastelitos she'd made from scratch. Miss Sonrisa was losing her smiles all right. Dedé had looked at her husband, a long look as if she could draw the young man of her dreams out from the bossy, old-fashioned macho he'd become. Is that what your mother says? He'd brought this up as he sat in slippers in the galleria enjoying the cool evening. He took a final swallow from his rum glass before he answered, That's what my mother says. Get me another one, would you, Mommy? He held out the glass, and Dedé had gone obediently to the icebox in the back of the house, where she burst into tears. What she wanted to hear from him was that he had noticed. Just his saying so would have made it better, whatever it was. She herself wasn't sure what. So when she saw her 3 sisters coming down the path that afternoon, she felt pure dread. It was as if 3 fates were approaching, their scissors poised to snip the knot that was keeping Dedé's life from falling apart. She knew why they had come. Patry had approached her in the fall with a strange request. Could she bury some boxes in one of the cacao fields in back of their old house? Dedé had been so surprised. Why, Patria, who put you up to this? Patria looked puzzled. We're all in it, if that's what you mean, but I'm speaking for myself. I see, Dedé had said, but really what she saw was Minerva in back of it all. Minerva agitating, No doubt she had sent Patria over, rather than come herself, since she and Dedé were not getting along. It had been years since they'd fought openly, since Leo, wasn't it? But recently their hot little exchanges had started up again. What could Dedé say? She had to talk to Jaimito first. Patria had given her a disappointed look, and Dedé had gotten defensive. What? I should go over Jaimito's head? It's only fair. He's the one farming the land. He's responsible for this place. But can't you decide on your own, then tell him? Dedé stared at her sister, disbelieving. That's what I did, Patria went on. I joined, and then I talked to Pedrito into joining me. Well, I don't have that kind of marriage, Dedé said. She smiled to take the huffiness out of her statement. What kind of marriage do you have? Patria looked at her with that sweetness on her face that could always penetrate Dedé's smiles. Dedé looked away. It's just that you don't seem yourself, Patria continued, reaching Dedé's hand. You seem so, I don't know, withdrawn. Is something wrong? It was Patria's worried tone more than her question that pulled Dedé back into that abandoned part of herself where she had hoped to give love and to receive it in full measure, both directions. Being there, she couldn't help herself. Though she tried giving Patria another of her brave smiles, Miss Sonrisa burst into tears. After Patria's visit, Dedé had talked to Jaimito. As she expected, his answer was an adamant no. But beyond what she had expected, he was furious with her for even considering such a request. The Mirabal sisters liked to run their men. That was the problem. In his house, he was the one to wear the pants. Swear you'll keep your distance from them. When he got upset, he would just raise his voice. But that night, he grabbed her by the wrists and shoved her on the bed only, he said later, to make her come to her senses. Swear! Now, when she thinks back, Dedé asks herself, as Minou has asked her, why? Why didn't you go along with her sisters? She was only 34. She could have started a new life. But no, she reminds herself, she wouldn't have started over. She would have died with them on that lonely mountain road. Even so, that night, her ears still ringing from Jaimito's shout, Dedé had been ready to risk her life. It was her marriage that she couldn't put on the line. She had always been the docile middle child, used to following the lead. Next to an alto, she sang alto. By a soprano, soprano. Miss Sonrisa, cheerful, compliant. Her life had gotten bound up with a domineering man, and so she shrank from the challenge her sisters were giving her. Dedé sent Patria a note. Sorry, Jaimito says no. And for weeks afterwards she avoided her sisters. And now, here they were, all three, like a posse, come to rescue her. Dedé's heart was beating away as she stood to welcome them. How wonderful to see you! She smiled, Miss Sonrisa, armed with smiles. She led them through the garden, delaying, showing off this and that new planting, as if they were here on a social call, as if they had come to show her how her jasmine shrubs were doing. They sat on the patio exchanging the little news. The children were all coming down with colds. Little Jacqueline would be 1 in a month. Patria was up all hours again with Raulito. That boy was still not sleeping through the night. This gringo doctor she was reading said it was the parents of colicky babies who were to blame. No doubt Raulito was picking up all the tension in the house. Speaking of picking up things, Minou had called Trujillo a bad word. Don't ask. She must have overheard her parents. They would have to be more careful. Imagine what could happen if there were another spine yard boy like Prieto on the premises. Imagine. An awkward silence fell upon them. Dedé braced herself. She expected Minerva to make an impassioned pitch for using the family farm for a munitions storage, but it was Mate who spoke up, the little sister who still wore her hair in braids and dressed herself and her baby girl in matching dresses. They had come, she said, because something big, really big, was about to happen. Mate's eyes were a child's, wide with wonder. Minerva drew her index finger across her throat and let her tongue hang out of her mouth. Patria and Mate burst into nervous giggles. Dedé couldn't believe it. They'd gone absolutely mad. This is serious business, she reminded them. Some fury that had nothing to do with this serious business was making her heart beat fast. You bet it is, Minerva said, laughing. The goat is going to die. Less than 3 weeks. Mate's voice was becoming breathy with excitement. On the feast day of the Virgencita, Patria exclaimed, making the sign of the cross and rolling her eyes heavenward. Aye, Virgencita, watch over us. Dedé pointed to her sisters. You're going to do it yourselves? Heavens, no, Mate said, horrified at the thought. The action group does the actual justice, but then all the different cells will liberate their locations. We'll be taking the Salcida Fortaleza. Dedé was about to remind her little sister of her fear of spiders, worms, noodles in her soup, but she let Mate go on. We're a cell, see, and there are usually only 3 in a cell, but we can make ours 4. Mate looked hopefully at Dedé, as if they were inviting her to join a goddamn volleyball team. This is a little sudden, I know, Patria was saying, but it's not like with the boxes, Dedé. This looks like a sure thing. This is a sure thing, Minerva confirmed. Don't decide now, Patria went on, as if afraid of what Dedé's snap decision might be. Think about it. Sleep on it. We're having a meeting next Sunday at my place. Aye, like old times, all 4 of us, Mate clapped her hands. Dedé could feel herself being swayed by the passion of her sisters. Then she hit the usual snag. And Jaimito? There was another awkward silence. Her sisters looked at each other. Our cousin is also invited, Minerva said, with that stiff tone she always used with Jaimito. But you know best whether it's worth asking him. What do you mean by that? Dedé snapped. I mean by that I don't know what Jaimito's politics are. Dedé's pride was wounded. Whatever their problems, Jaimito was her husband, the father of her children. Jaimito's no Trujillista, if that's what you're implying, no more than Papa was. In his own way, Papa was a Trujillista, Minerva announced. All her sisters looked at her, shocked. Papa was a hero, Dedé fumed. He died because of what he went through in prison. You should know. He was trying to keep you out of trouble. Minerva nodded. That's right. His advice was always, don't annoy the bees, don't annoy the bees. It's men like him and Jaimito and other scared fulanitos who have kept the devil in power all these years. How can you say that about Papa? Dedé could hear her voice rising. How can you let her say that about Papa? She tried to enlist her sisters. Mate had begun to cry. This isn't what we came for, Patria reminded Minerva, who stood and walked to the porch rail and stared out into the garden. Dedé raked her eyes over the yard, half afraid her sister was finding fault there too. But the crotons were lusher than ever, and the variegated bougainvilleas she hadn't thought would take were heavy with pink blossoms. All the beds were neat and weedless, everything in its place. Only in the new bed where she'd just been working did the soil look torn up, and it was disturbing to see, among the established plantings, the raw brown earth like a wound in the ground. We want you with us. That's why we're here. Minerva's eyes, as she fixed them on her sister, were full of longing. What if I can't? Dedé's voice shook. Jaimito thinks it's suicide. He told me that he'll leave me if I get mixed up in this thing. There, she'd said it. Dedé felt the hot flush of shame on her face. She was hiding herself behind her husband's fears, bringing down scorn on him instead of herself. Our dear cousin, Minerva said sarcastically, but she stopped herself on a look from Patria. Everyone has their own reasons for the choices they make, Patria said, diffusing the charged atmosphere, and we have to respect that. Blessed are the peacemakers, Dedé thought, but she couldn't for the life of her remember what the prize was that had been promised them. Whatever you decide, we'll understand, Patria concluded, looking around at her sisters. Mate nodded, but Minerva could never leave well enough alone. As she climbed in the car, she reminded Dedé, next Sunday at Patria's around 3, in case you change your mind, she added. As she watched them drive away, Dedé felt strangely mingled surges of dread and joy. Kneeling at the new bed helped calm the shaking in her knees. Before she had finished smoothing the soil and laying out a border of little stones, she had worked out her plan. Only much later did she realize she'd forgotten to put any seeds in the ground. She would leave him. Next to that decision, attending the underground meeting over at Patria's was nothing but a small step after the big turn had been taken. All week she refined the plan for it. As she beat the mattresses and fumigated the baseboards for red ants, as she chopped onions for the boys' breakfast mangou and had them drink limoncillo tea to keep away the cold going around, she plotted, She savored her secret, which tasted deliciously of freedom, as she allowed his weight on her in the dark bedroom and waited for him to be done. Next Sunday, while Jaimito was at his galera, Dedé would ride over to the meeting. When he came back, he would find the note propped on his pillow. I feel like I'm buried alive. I need to get out. I can't go on with this travesty. Their life together had collapsed. From puppy dog devotion, he had moved on to a moody bossiness complicated with intermittent periods of dogged remorse that would have been passion had there been less of his hunger and more of her desire in it. True to her nature, Dedé had made the best of things, eager for order, eager for peace. She herself was preoccupied by the births of their sons, by the family setbacks after Papa was jailed, by Papa's sad demise and death, by her own numerous business failures. By their own numerous business failures. Perhaps Jaimito felt broken by these failures and her reminders of how she had tried to prevent them. His drinking, always social, became more solitary. It was natural to blame herself. Maybe she hadn't loved him enough. Maybe he sensed how someone else's eyes had haunted her most of her married life. Leo! What had become of him? Dedé had asked Minerva several times, quite casually, about their old friend, but Minerva didn't know a thing. Last she'd heard, Leo had made it to Venezuela, where a group of exiles was training for an invasion. Then recently, without her even asking, Minerva had confided to Dedé that their old friend was alive and kicking. Tune in to Radio Rombos, 99 on your dial. Minerva knew Jaimito would be furious if she found Dedé listening to that outlawed station, yet her sister taunted her. One naughty night, Dedé left Jaimito sleeping heavily after sex and stole out to the far end of the garden to the little shack where she kept the garden tools. There in the dark, sitting on a sack of bark chips for her orchids, Dedé had slowly turned the dial on Jaimito Enrique's transistor radio. The static crackled, and then a voice, very taken with itself, proclaimed, "Condemn me, it does not matter. History will absolve me." Fidel's speech was played endlessly at these off hours, as Dedé soon found out, but night after night she kept returning to the shack, and twice she was rewarded with the unfamiliar blurry voice of someone introduced as Comrade Virgilio. He spoke his high-flown talk, which had never been what appealed to Dedé. Even so, night after night she returned to the shed, for these excursions were what mattered now. They were her secret rebellion, her heart hungering, her little underground of one. Now planning her exodus, Dedé tried to imagine Leo's surprise at hearing Dedé had joined her sisters. He would know that she, too, was one of the brave ones. His sad, sober eyes that had hung before her mind's eye for so many years melted into the ones that looked back at her now from the mirror. I need to get out. I cannot go on with this travesty. As the day grew closer, Dedé was beset by doubts, particularly when she thought about her boys, Enrique, Rafael, David. How could she possibly leave them? Jaimito would never let her keep them. He was more than possessive with his sons, claiming them as if they were parts of himself. Look at how he named them all with his first name, as well as his last. Jaime Enrique Fernandez, Jaime Rafael Fernandez, Jaime David Fernandez. Only their middle names, which perforce became their given names, were their own. It wasn't just that she couldn't bear losing her boys, although that in itself was a dread large enough to stop her in her tracks. She also couldn't desert them. Who would stand between them and the raised hand when their father lost his temper? Who would make them mangou the way they liked it, cut their hair so it looked right, and sit in the dark with them when they were scared and the next morning not remind them that she had been there? She needed to talk to someone outside her sisters. The priest. She'd gotten lax in her church attendance. The new militancy from the pulpit had become like so much noise in a place where you had come to hear soothing music. But now that noise seemed in harmony with what she saw, with what she was feeling inside. Maybe this new young priest, Padre de Jesus, would have an answer for her. She arranged for a ride that Friday with Mama's new neighbors, Don Bernardo and his wife Doña Belén, old Spaniards who'd been living down in San Cristobal for years. They had decided to move to the countryside, Don Bernardo explained, hoping the air would help Doña Belén. Something was wrong with the frail old woman. She was forgetting the simplest things, what a fork was for, how to button her dress. Was it the seed or the meat of the mango that you could eat? Don Bernardo was taking her to Salcedo for yet another round of tests at the clinic. We won't be coming back until late afternoon. I hope that won't inconvenience you very much, he apologized. The man was astonishingly courtly. Not at all, Dedé assured him. She could just be dropped off at the church. What have you got to do all day in church? Doña Belén had a disconcerting ability to suddenly tune in quite clearly, especially to what was none of her business. Community work, Dedé lied. You Mirabal girls are so civic-minded, Don Bernardo observed. No doubt he was thinking of Minerva, or his favorite, Patria. It was harder to satisfy Jaimito's suspicions. If you need to go to Salcedo, I'll take you tomorrow. He had come into the bedroom as she was getting dressed that Friday morning. Jaimito, por Dios, she pleaded. He had already forbidden her to go about with her sisters. Was he now going to keep her from accompanying a poor old woman to the doctor? Since when has Doña Belén been a preoccupation of yours? Then he said the thing he knew would make her feel the guiltiest. And what about leaving the boys when they're sick? All they have is cold, for God's sake, and Tanita's here to help them. Jaimito blinked in surprise at her sharp tone. Was it really this easy, Dedé wondered, taking command? Do as you please, then. He was giving her little knowing nods, his hands curling into fists. But remember, you're going over my head. Jaimito did not return her wave as they drove away from Ojo de Agua. Something threatening in his look scared her. But Dedé kept reminding herself she needed not be afraid. She was going to be leaving him. She told herself to keep that in mind. No one answered her knock at the rectory, although she kept coming back every half hour all morning long. In between times, she idled in shops, remembering Jaimito's look that morning, feeling her resolve draining away. At noon, when everything closed up, she sat under a shade tree in the square and fed the pieces of pastry she'd bought to the pigeons. Once she thought she saw Jaimito's pickup, and she began making up stories for why she had strayed from Doña Belén at the clinic. Mid-afternoon, she spotted a green panel truck pulling up to the rectory gates. Padre de Jesus was in the passenger seat, another man was driving, a third jumped out the back, unlocked the courtyard gates, and closed them after the truck pulled in. Dedé hurried across the street. There was only a little time left before she had to meet up with Don Bernardo and Doña Belén at the clinic, and she had to talk to the priest. All day the yeses and nos had been swirling inside her, faster, until she felt dizzy with indecision. Waiting on that bench, she had promised herself that the priest's answer would decide it, once and for all. She knocked several times before Padre de Jesus finally came to the door. Many apologies. He was unloading the truck. Hadn't heard the knocker until just now. Please, come in. He would be right with her. He left her sitting in the small vestibule while she finished up with the delivery Dedé could hear going on in the adjoining choir room. Over his shoulder as he departed, Dedé caught glimpses of some pine boxes, half covered by a tarpaulin. Something about their color and their long shape recalled an incident at Patria's house last fall. Dedé had come over to help paint the baby's room. She had gone into Norris's room in search of some old sheets to lay on the floor, and there, in the closet, hidden behind a row of dresses, she'd seen several boxes just like these, standing on end. Patria had come in, acting very nervous, stammering about those boxes being full of new tools. Not long after, when Patria had come with her request to hide some boxes, Dedé had understood what tools were inside them. My God, Padre de Jesus was one of them. He would encourage her to join the struggle. Of course he would. And she knew, right then and there, her knees shaking, her breath coming short, that she could not go through with this business. Jaimito was just an excuse. She was afraid, plain and simple, just as she said she'd been afraid by her powerful feelings for Leo. Instead, she had married Jaimito, although she knew she did not love him enough. And here she always berated him for his failures in business when the greater bankruptcy had been on her part. She told herself that she was going to be late for her rendezvous. She ran out of that rectory before the priest could return and arrived at the clinic while Doña Belén was still struggling with the buttons of her dress.